Why is it that absolute monsters are given the blessing and gift of having children? It's just so unfair. Hi guys, welcome back, thanks for joining me. This is a case that I followed in the press just because I originally saw body cam footage with Nazli Merthoca and I was just blindsided by how unaffected she was by what was going on around her, which is essentially her child being in critical condition. And therefore, I wanted to see it through. Was this the woman who was just overwhelmed with motherhood, that she did something unthinkable? Or was this a violent predator of the highest level? Today's case is going to example the latter with respect. Let's talk about Nazli Merthoca. She wasn't some, as I said, unsuspecting, overwhelmed mother blindsided by circumstance. She was actually a woman with a really heavy documented history of violent assault, volatile temper, and yes, of course, what we're talking about today is how that temper can spiral out of control. And with respect, when you look at her in general, you look at her relationship history, for example, she is chaotic in those relationships. She's a mutual abuser, so I'm not saying she's not a victim too. I'm saying that she's also highly abusive on a domestic level. And her relationships were definitely marked by conflict rather than care. And crucially, what you have to remember is the story I'm going to tell you today involves the authorities already knowing about that particular type of pattern. So when Merthoca gives birth to twins, yes, she was blessed with twins in 2024. The system basically didn't wait and see. So a protection order was put in place immediately. And with respect, that alone tells you everything that you need to know about the level of concern surrounding her capacity to parent safely. It's not about paranoia, it was about prevention. Or at least it was meant to be about prevention, but heartbreakingly, that wasn't going to be enough. Because one of these beautiful twin babies, one of these tiny defenseless 3-month-olds, loses their life at the hands of their own mother. Kelani Kalanzi should have been protected by every single adult in her life, but instead she's become another failed child. A failed child by an adult who couldn't regulate her emotions, her behaviour, or most importantly, her violence. And let's be clear, this is not a case about a tragic accident. This was not an unavoidable moment of loss. This is the killing of a baby. Kehlani's story isn't just about a mother's struggles or excuses. It's about that 3-month-old defenseless baby who never stood a chance against an adult who should never have been given the opportunity, as far as I'm concerned, to keep that child in her care. Because at the end of the day, she is not fit for purpose as a parent per se. Let's talk about Nazli Merthoca, who is the predator in this case. She was born on January the 19th, 2001. She did have a challenging life. She experienced physical abuse when she was young. And when she was 12 years of age, she ends up going into care. Now, in the UK, it's a high bar for going into care. There'll be odd cases where children end up in care that shouldn't, but with respect, most who end up in care have had a very turbulent, dysfunctional experience with their parents. So when you get to the point where you go into care, you can imagine there's been a hell of a lot of destabilisation within your life. Now, at that point, you would hope, wouldn't you, that maybe the care that she would receive would put her in good stead for the future. Not in this case. She was reportedly groomed by older men. And we know this happens time and time again. I worked with original victims of grooming cases 20 years ago, where children were groomed in the UK, mostly by Pakistani men. That was a demographic who went for that particular type of grooming, and it's become so problematic in the UK that we now are having a full-blown investigation and inquiry, finally, after many, many years. Because you imagine that if a child is placed in care, they're going to be safe. But actually what you see is that people are aware that those kids are really vulnerable and really desperate, and therefore they're easier to manipulate. So this certainly seems to have been something that happened to her. And it's from this point when Merthoca said that she basically needed to self-regulate her emotions as far as she was concerned by using cannabis and alcohol. She's self-medicating, which is a terrible recipe when you have a backdrop of all the issues that she has. So without a doubt, I will say this is someone who's had a difficult upbringing and a pretty troubled start in life. We are not going to allow that to be an excuse though. There are a ton of people out there with horrendous experiences in their childhood who go on to be unbelievably lovely and loving human beings and great parents. Now, in October 2016, we know that Merthoca was convicted of an assault. She's only 16 at that moment in time. So at that point, she's still considered to be a juvenile. Now, they decide that they're going to make her the subject of a referral order as a result of this. So basically, these orders are about if a first-time young offender's pled guilty to a crime that isn't too serious, then they can be given a referral order. This means they can take part in rehabilitative actions like community work. So as opposed to getting prison time, custodial time, they just get to do things that hopefully will help them feel more part of their community and help them do some restorative work as opposed to rehabilitation inside. Now, that referral order clearly did not have the intended impact on Merthoca at all, and to some degree, instead of seeing that as a warning or a close call for prison time, she actually carries on committing further acts of violence. It seems to be within her very nature. Now, in 2018, this is when she's 18 years of age, she's then given a youth rehabilitation order for 12 months. Again, this is for an assault. She committed that assault when she was 17 years of age. It was also for shoplifting and a battery offence when she was 18 years of age. Now, as part of that rehabilitation order, she had to complete an activity requirement and she was also subject to supervision and a curfew. So she'd be monitored when she was going and coming to her home, and she'd have to be within a certain time frame. So if it said she has to be in by 10 p.m, she has to be in by 10 p.m. It will be tracked. Now, we know that this is clearly at this point someone who's dealing with serious anger problems. She has committed 3 violent crimes in the space of 2 years, and she's very young. And with respect, we can say that's not therefore promising for her future behaviour. I am 100% behind the idea of young people getting rehabilitation because it's really important for young offenders. They can change their ways. But with respect, in this circumstance, it hasn't had any kind of intended change to her behaviour. So it doesn't seem that serious when you actually look at her crimes. You would imagine they would be met with more serious kinds of protocol to ensure that she does change her ways. Now, there aren't any details that have been given as to what she actually did, but like I said, to be convicted for 2 assaults, battery and shoplifting on different occasions, all before the age of 18, it's obviously very serious. And as well as seeing absolutely no prison time, that rehabilitation order was actually only for 1 year. Personally, I don't think that seems proportional, and I think it really sets the tone that, as far as she's concerned, she can get away with committing pretty serious violence and just get a slap on the wrist in return. And that's negative, because when somebody is on the streets with that kind of mindset, it means they can go on to commit further harm because they just don't see consequences to their behaviour initially. Now, in the same year, Merthoca actually has her first child. Now, this child ends up going to live with their birth father. I would say a very lucky escape for that child, actually going and being with a parent who wants them and probably has the actual capacity to look after that child. Now, at some point, as you'd expect, she's meeting guys and she ends up getting into a relationship with a man called Herbert Kalanzi. He was born on June the 2nd, 1990. He was around 11 years older than Merthoca. So this, to some degree, probably patterns some of the abuse that she experienced. So she's already been groomed by older guys. She's probably been sexualized by older guys, and he's 11 years older, so he fits that typology. A lot of people do play out their trauma in relationships that they seek. And the fact that he's 11 years older likely means that he's going to have more authority in the relationship just because of his experiences, and often we'll see age as a dominant factor when it comes down to abuse. You know, the older person feels that they have more right to abuse the younger person in the relationship. Now, reportedly, there were some domestic issues between the pair, but there isn't a lot of available in public about this. What we do know is in 2020, Merthoca has a second child. We don't know whether that child is Kalanzi's or if the father is the same as that of the first child or someone else. There's no information on that, and that makes sense because you want to protect the anonymity of the child that's born to her because they aren't going to be growing up with her. And we don't have any information on when or how Merthoca met Kalanzi. It could have been in her peer group, it could have been friends, it could have been online. The reality is they meet. We get to the 4th of April 2024. This is when Merthoca gives birth to twin baby girls. Imagine that blessing. Imagine being in a situation where you don't just get one bundle of joy, you get 2. And I get it, it's very stressful. I appreciate that having twins is a completely different paradigm to having an individual baby. God knows how women cope and men cope when they have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 kids all at the same moment in time. I think you would literally need the village to raise a child, because I don't know how you would get through the day without a lot of community support. But even twin babies, it doesn't just double the stress. I think that that's an inappropriate way of viewing it. It's more than that, because understandably, the life shift when you have one child is enormous, but when you have 2 children at exactly the same point, they need things in the same moment, and actually that can cause a lot of volume in the home, children crying in the home, that can add to stress in the home, and for most of us, we'll get on with it even if we're exhausted. But if you have a violent temperament, that really can inject stress at a high level into your scenario, and stress absolutely exacerbates violent natures. Now, as is the case with lots of twin births, the children are born prematurely, and we actually only have information about one of the babies, and that's the victim in this case. So she was called Keilani Kalanzi, and she had to go into the special care unit after her birth. Now, as I said earlier, the twins had actually been on the radar of social services even before their birth. Now, in part, this is due to Merthoca's drug use and also her mental health. So again, could be part of possibility there regarding not safeguarding the needs of her child. But the other thing that's noted by social services is that the relationship she has with her partner is very toxic. Now, I'm sure that she plays a part in that toxicity without a doubt. So Merthoca and Kalanzi have to basically prove that they're fit parents prior to being allowed to take their babies home. Apparently, they succeeded in doing that, but bear in mind, when you're in hospital, particularly when you're in prem care, you have a wraparound service. The people who are looking after your children do a hell of a lot for you. You're kind of protected from the reality of being a parent until, of course, you put that baby in the baby seat and you get them back home to your place, at which point you actually see with technical vision how parenting is going to be. And it can be quite shocking. Now, we know that a child protection plan was put in place. Kalanzi had to attend a program called Caring Dad. And so Caring Dad's basically aimed at engaging fathers to enhance the safety and well-being of their children. It does worry me quite a lot that we have programs like that, because Caring Dad should just be the very basis of being a father, let alone all the other expectations that we should have about a man in a child's life. And the idea that they're having to run courses to make guys actually think about their responsibility and care, like I said, a very low bar starting point where this parent is concerned. Now, another part of the plan actually included Kalanzi letting social services know if Merthoca began taking drugs. Just think about that for a second. Just work that through in your head. So the guy in this relationship, who's literally meant to be in an intimate relationship with their partner, is meant to basically snitch on their partner if they start taking drugs. How many partners would feel uncomfortable doing that? And then you've got the other side of it. How many partners would use that as a weapon in a relationship? To me, that is a whole heap of gone wrong right there. Look, if you want to test that Kalanzi is taking drugs, get random drug samples done. It's very simple. Make sure that she does a urine test. Make sure it's in view of the probation officer, for example, or in this case, social worker. But make sure that's done so that they know. Because otherwise, it's guesswork. He could use that to batter her in an emotional way. If you don't do A, then I'm going to say that you're taking drugs. Or he could protect her. She's taking drugs, but I'm not going to tell anyone. No one's thinking about the obvious reality in that circumstance, and it makes no sense to me whatsoever. Now, they both apparently had to remove themselves if they had any domestic conflict. Again, what is going on here? It's like a exercise where somebody's written these bullet points. All right, you have to report on your partner if she starts taking drugs. Also, you do have to withdraw from conflict if you're having an argument. Even the best of us in pretty harmonious relationships, myself included, aren't able always to remove themselves from conflict. You know why? You're having an argument. That's why there's conflict. And if you don't have the blueprint for how to do that, such as a good foundation of support when you were growing up, such as feeling that you have the capacity to withdraw because you understand the consequences of remaining present, if you don't have that, how are you going to change the typology of the way that you row? It just doesn't make sense again. Now, they are regularly monitored by social services, but it was said that Merthoca apparently, quote, despised the social services and also sought to challenge them rather than accept the help. She's very oppositional when it comes down to that kind of support. Now, don't get me wrong, again, I will acknowledge that she's probably had some really bad times in the past where social care is meant to have protected her and it's failed. So I understand that she probably struggles with that authority and she struggles to believe that they can help her in any way, shape or form because they might have put her in danger. In her mind's eye, that might be the way that she thinks. That's her blueprint of that experience. But nonetheless, again, when it comes down to the fact that like it or otherwise, they have power in this situation, they can remove your child ultimately or your children ultimately. So it's best to go along with them, even if you don't like that intrusion. The fact that she sees her needs and her feelings is more important, again, speaks volumes about Merthoca as a human being. Now, on May the 13th, 2024, Kehlani is allowed home. She'd actually spent 29 days on a special care baby unit, and I imagine for that poor little baby, that was the most idyllic time of her life. Because at the end of the day, she had that wraparound care, she was being fed, she was being comforted, she was being looked after, she was safe. Then she's released to the person who's meant to do more than just keep her safe. She's meant to love her, nurture her, be compassionate towards her, protect her at all costs. And that's exactly the opposite of what Merthoca's going to do. She, at this point, is living at her grandmother's flat at Nisbet House on Homerton High Street. So this is the address that she brought the babies home to. It is actually unclear as to whether Kehlani was permanently residing at the same address. I am going to presume that that is the case, however. We get to the 8th of July, 2024. It's just before 10:30 p.m. At this point, Merthoca calls 999. And this is where the excuses and lies begin. So she tells them that she's fed Kehlani at 10 p.m. and put her to bed. But when she goes to check on her babies, it's around 15 minutes later apparently, because of course we're going to introduce the idea that I'm a really good parent who goes and checks on my babies constantly. And that's the lie that she's going to tell. Kehlani apparently isn't moving. And also she's suddenly gasping for breath. She said at this point she attempted CPR, but then milk's coming out of her nose and her mouth. And she said that now she couldn't see her breathing, but she could see that she was warm, but was losing heat. And she can also apparently hear gurgling and bubbles. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was genuinely dealing with that scene, and I appreciate some of you out there will have actually gone through things similar, and you will have a different trauma story to me. And maybe it's because of my own allegiance with my personal experience of horrific trauma in my life. I was useless. And that wasn't with a child, that was with my father when I needed to do all those things because I just couldn't believe that I had lost my dad or that my dad was dying in front of me. The reality is that in a moment of trauma, very often you just lose control. You're hysterical. The idea that she's kind of listing all of these things doesn't stand well or bode well for me. That she's being very specific about the fact that she's attempted CPR, milk's coming out of the child's nose and mouth, she can't see her breathing, she's warm but she's losing heat, she can hear bubbles. It just doesn't ring true. Now the operator, rightfully so, says, is there anything in Kehlani's mouth? Merthoca says that there was sick in her mouth, but then when they speak to Kehlani, they say there's nothing in her mouth. Now, the operator understandably needs to discern which one is correct, and Merthoca is actually annoyed by this and ends the call. Just let that sink in. Basically, your child is so gravely ill that you don't think they're breathing, they're losing heat, and that operator has the audacity to ask the question, who's correct? Is the dad in this situation correct who says there is vomit in the mouth? Or is it that she's correct as the mother and there is no issue with that? Because clearly you're going to have to remove an obstruction if it's in the throat. And it's also really important to tell the paramedics that. But no, the response to that is, oh, I'm just going to put the phone down on you. Said no distressed, no traumatized, no good parent ever in the history of good parents. Now, understandably, the operator calls back. And at this point, Merthoca said that she placed Kehlani on her fronts and says that there's a little bit of milk and a little bit of blood coming out of her nose. Now, when the call operator tries to help Merthoca, as they always do, she said, I'm not doing anything. I don't know how to. I am panicking. But bear in mind, prior to this, she's told the operator that she's done CPR. She's told the operator she's done like some kind of full-scale observation of her daughter to actually express and impress what's going on for her. Now, at this point, Kalanzi takes the phone and he actually does follow instructions on how to perform CPR, which I do appreciate must be absolutely terrifying if it's on a small child. But nonetheless, it needs to be done if that child is going to be given a hope of surviving. Now, emergency services arrive, and at this point, they find Kehlani in the most critical condition. At this point, they notice that she's wearing just a nappy. They do confirm that she's got milk coming out of her mouth and her nostrils. Also, she has a lot of sick on her face. When they find her, she's on a sofa bed and Kalanzi is still performing CPR. One of the things the paramedics also know in that environment is they can smell cannabis. Merthoca then, at that point, isn't, I would say, contextually acting how you would expect her to act as a mother who's got this child who is desperately unwell, clearly desperately unwell. In her own words, has been losing heat, doesn't think she's breathing. But she appears really calm, and she basically says to them that this beautiful little child's heart has stopped beating. They then ask in plain English, "Do you mean the baby's dead?" And she responds, "Yes." Now, as I've said, I appreciate that psychologically we all react differently at times to trauma, but this is totally atypical. When they say, "Do you mean the baby is dead?" just to be like, yeah. Now, it's also said that she was aggressive and even obstructive to the emergency responders who are trying to literally help her baby. She even says that she'll call the police and she's actually filming them on her phone, which makes no sense. These people are literally here to save her baby's life. She hasn't called for their help. They have attended. Now she's being obstructive. Now she's being threatening. Now, at this point, they realise they need another ambulance crew because it's evident that Kehlani's experienced a cardiac arrest. And what does Merthoca say? She says that they should have arrived with the right equipment and the required equipment, as if she's some kind of expert now on how paramedics work. She also tells them that she and Kalanzi had actually watched videos on how to administer CPR. I mean, if you genuinely have time to Google CPR when your baby is dying, it means you have actually no connection to their need and every connection to you trying to get away with something. It's as simple as that, in my opinion. Also, she says that during the evening feed, Kehlani had apparently started to feel clammy, was unsettled, but she just put it down to the little girl scratching her face. I mean, it's very common when you've got a baby. They do scratch their face. They've got little nails and they break very easily and they get little red marks all over the face. That's why people put little baby mittens on them. So yes, babies can certainly do that, but they don't act clammy. They don't act in a totally unsettled way when that occurs. That speaks of something more problematic going on. She then says that when she goes and checks on her, because like I said, she's trying to pretend that she cares, she said that she found that she was choking on her milk and bubbles were coming out of her nose. Now, as this is all playing out, the main concern of the paramedics is Kehlani. They move her onto a table, they suction the vomit from her airway, and then they place her on a ventilation and they rush her to Homerton Hospital. They're desperately trying to save that little girl's life. When they get that beautiful little girl to the hospital, they do tests on her. It turns out that she has catastrophically suffered a bilateral subarachnoid hemorrhage, subdural hematoma, and a large intracranial bleed. This is not a child choking on their vomit. This is not a child struggling to keep their milk down. This is not a child who scratched their face and was fussy. I guess if we were going to compare it to an adult, imagine somebody in a high-speed crash. That's the kind of injuries we're talking about there. Now we get to July the 9th. At this point, Kehlani is transferred to Great Ormond Street Hospital. For those of you who are outside of the UK, you don't know Great Ormond Street Hospital, it is probably the pivotal stone of hospitals in the UK for children. It is considered the pièce de résistance. It has the most amazing specialist, and if your child is being treated there, on the whole, you will feel very lucky because they do the very best they can and they have the best types of treatment and the best type of new medicine approaches and the best type of opportunity. So if you do end up there, you're in really safe hands, like I said, on the whole. Now, the police, at this point, they're informed that the extensive brain damage that Kehlani was displaying was likely caused by physical abuse. So clearly, we're not talking about an autopsy at this moment in time. We're talking about the scans that have come in. And obviously, when they look at that, they're saying there is no way this could have been accidental. This has definitely been caused by some kind of abuse. Her injuries also didn't align with the story that Merthoca provided, which is very important. Bear in mind, apparently, she just put her to bed. She was perfectly well. And Merthoca reportedly said that Great Ormond Street was a hospital of, quote, white supremacy. That's right. Merthoca said that Great Ormond Street was a hospital of white supremacy. I can unpick that in so many different ways. First of all, in the UK, we have a huge amount of individuals from all ethnic minority backgrounds working in hospitals. Massive amount. Secondly, white supremacy. You walk into a hospital with your child, particularly Great Ormond Street, they swoop up that child and they provide service. That's not what white supremacists would do. They're not right-wing Nazis. It's ludicrous that that mindset is even there. And she also said that the doctors were racist and disrespectful. I probably imagine that the way that the doctors were to her were absolutely resentful of the fact that this woman had taken this beautiful child and clearly harmed them. It's not their job to be respectful to somebody who doesn't deserve it. And that's me imagining the very worst of, that maybe the nurses looked at her with disdain. Maybe the doctors spoke to her without the etiquette they would usually reserve for speaking to parents, because maybe they knew that they weren't dealing with a parent, they were dealing with a predator. And it's very hard to stomach those individuals. Listen to the way that I speak. I've worked in psychological therapies for 2 decades, and let me tell you, I've never worked with sex offenders because I know I can't respect them. So I need to know my moral compass, and same, when it comes down to people who hurt children, I can't work with them because I can't offer them the environment that they would need to heal or to change, if that's even possible. So I know my limits. I don't expect doctors and nurses who probably have children at home to look at somebody who's problematic, who's obstructive, who's downright dangerous, and offer them the respect level that this person clearly arrogantly believes that she deserves. Apparently she was unhappy that the doctors were focusing on Kaylani and not her. Could you be any more entitled? Could you be any more arrogant? Could you be any more delusional about your particular self-worth? It appears so. Now, she also said that the reason that she was being treated that way was because of her race and her gender. Just throwing them all around, isn't it? Trying to put people on the back foot. Oh, you're being racist. Oh, you're being sexist. That can really impact on people because they're afraid. We live in a society these days where literally you can get cancelled from your job for just an opinion that 10 years ago nobody would have batted an eyelid at. It's just life. You know what? Life can be offensive. Deal with it. That's how it used to be. But these days people are afraid of that kind of language being used against them. And she knows that. And that's why she's saying it, because she wants more treatment for herself, not for her child. Now, you will not be surprised to hear that on the very same day, Merthoca and Kalanzi are arrested on suspicion of attempted murder. It goes without saying, it's all pointing towards them. And what is astonishing is that when this takes place, when they are told what is going to happen, Merthoca becomes really angry. She isn't feeling pensive about her actions. She's not feeling any level of empathy towards her daughter. She's not being empathetic. She is just genuinely annoyed that people know that she's the problem in this situation. And she's gonna absolutely make it clear that as far as she's concerned, she's been an A-grade parent and done nothing wrong, even though anyone with an ounce of common sense, I mean, just a general person who takes 2 minutes to look at this case from an external perspective with no qualifications, no experience, no policing background, no forensic background, they'd be like, yeah, it's definitely the mother or the father. It's obvious that that's the case. But again, she's resistant on every single level, and she's calling blue murder about how dare people even consider that she would be the kind of person to do that when she was the person who called 999. Ludicrous.
Hello. No, can we have a chat first? No, we need to have a chat first. No. Can you open the door? I'm not saying you've done anything, but we need to have a chat.
You're not going to grab me.
I'm not going to grab you. We need to have a chat.
TikTok live.
You want to put it on TikTok Live?
What do you want to have a chat about outside in my grandma's estate?
Well, we can go inside.
No, I'm going to the hospital because are you Mark? Where's Mark?
No, who's Mark?
Police that called my phone.
The police that called your phone?
My daughter's at the hospital. because she stopped breathing yesterday. Her heart stopped breathing, and she was crying, and her milk was coming out her mouth and stuff. And I did CPR and I called the ambulance. So why have you guys been called when I'm on the way to the hospital?
So we were called by the hospital because they just had some concerns.
Yeah, what was the concern? That I wasn't coming.
Concerns. I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but I am coming. You lot actually met me when I was coming out, and the social worker came with you. She said she was meeting me.
So the social worker?
Hey, yeah, she's there.
There's no money in time, madam. You're under arrest for attempted murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm you. We've got reasons to believe, and we suspect that you have, so that's the reason why we're doing this.
So do I need to speak to someone?
So I'm going to go jail for attempted murder that I didn't
You're
do.
not going to go to jail, sweetheart. That's not how this works.
I'm gonna be. I called the ambulance because
okay.
she wasn't breathing and
wasn't
her breathing was going. No one attempted to kill her. If anyone else called the ambulance and said the same about their child, they wouldn't be arrested like I am being doing now.
Okay.
Why? I pay my taxes to use your services, and I called the ambulance.
The hospital have concerns about how these injuries came about, okay?
Yeah, but
that's why we have come today.
They've come about.
That's between you and the hospital, okay?
Yeah,
but right now, this is the procedure that needs to go through.
Investigation of what happened. How?
Investigation. That's how this works, honey. Because we need to speak to you.
You're saying attempted murder. Is she dead? Is she dead?
No, she's not dead.
So why are you saying attempted murder? I haven't harmed her.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Where are you taking me now?
We're just waiting for a van to come.
So she brought you here with a car to get me arrested?
That's not how it works, honey. That's not how this works.
You know you can't arrest me.
That's not how this works.
I see the perinatal mental health team. You're going to have to deal with me as someone who's unwell.
Right, okay.
That's fine. But this is from the hospital, so from the hospital.
Yeah, right. Can I pop your...
Right. But you know, if I get to the police station, you guys don't need to put me in a cell. You can interview me if I'm doing it. If I'm voluntarily.
We'll make that risk assessment when we get there.
I called the ambulance and I didn't do anything. I did CPR. I don't know what you want me to do.
I understand it's
for me.
Right. Well, let's take it one step at a time, okay? Take it one step at a time. One step at a time.
Everything.
Okay, I'm ruining everything, that's fine. But I'm going to give you a search now, okay? To make sure you have nothing on you.
You can arrest me like this when I haven't done anything.
I haven't done anything. Okay.
You can actually take this in for interviewing. Someone has told you, because it's the hospital belief that something happened.
Because now you've been arrested during my care. This one, this way, honey.
Okay, Portero, I'm going to get wet on my feet, yeah?
Well, we've got something to dry, so okay. So you see these empty. Anything found in here afterward will be attributed. Okay, then step up, love.
This is my first
Step up. Step up.
One of the things that she does, which is interesting though, is when she's taken into custody, she said that she'd leave the country if she's released on bail. So immediately saying that she's a flight risk, making sure that bail is not likely going to be given to her. Now, when she's interviewed and when he's interviewed, as parents, they both deny that anyone's hurt Kehlani. Merthoca actually said to an officer, "This is a man using his sex against me, using his manly voice against me. He wants to intimidate me as the woman beater he probably is." I mean, where do you even begin with that POS? I mean, it's ludicrous, isn't it? Okay, so you're trying to say to me that because I'm interviewing you about a crime that's clearly been committed against your daughter, that the reason that I am actually doing this is because I enjoy basically beating up women. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's exactly it. I have managed to assess in these moments being interviewed by you that not only are you a white supremacist male wife beater, you're also really bad at Scrabble. Sorry, I threw that in at the end. It's ludicrous though, isn't it? It's a ridiculous idea. And again, Merthoca is basically trying to make that officer feel like he is a threat and that she can use certain things against him because she is a female. At the end of the day, Merthoca doesn't really understand it. No one's looking at her as a woman anymore. No one's looking at her as a female. They're looking at her as a high-level perpetrator of the worst kind. A person who's done unbelievable damage to their own child. That's what the officers are looking at. That's what people like me are thinking. So the idea that she thinks that that individual is using anything against her apart from her own actions is ludicrous. And with respect to the police, very often they are far nicer than any of us would wish for them to be in these situations. And they're very respectful during interviews because, of course, it's all recorded, isn't it? At the end of the day, you don't want something coming up in court that shows you to be in a very bad light. So I don't believe for a minute that she in any way, shape or form is being disrespected in this manner. Now, whilst all this is playing out, of course, we've got to focus back on what's happening with Kehlani, and unfortunately her condition is worsening. So she gets to Great Ormond Street, they try a lot of specialist intervention, but unfortunately on July the 23rd, they have to make a really heartbreaking decision. The doctors ultimately withdrew the life support that was keeping Kehlani alive, so she subsequently dies at 6 p.m. that day. And of course then, it leads to the autopsy. So this is on the 30th of July. Post-mortem's conducted, and at this point it is found that Kehlani had been killed as a result of blunt force trauma to the head. She had multifocal thin film subdural hemorrhages, extensive bilateral findings in the eyes, including multi-layer retinal hemorrhages, widespread retinal detachment, let that sink in, retinal detachment, a left perimacular fold, bilateral optic nerve sheath hemorrhages, orbital soft tissue hemorrhages, and peripapillary scleral hemorrhage. So it was said that the injuries that Kehlani had suffered could only have been caused by severe shaking. And of course, this fully aligns with the investigators' theories that Merthoca was not telling the truth about how Kehlani came to be in that condition. Of course she isn't. We all know that. We all know children don't end up in this situation, bleeding from the nostrils, covered in vomit, because they've just had some kind of reaction to a scratch on their face, or they're just being a bit fussy. You can just tell that something seriously wrong has happened to that child. Now, it's the forensic pathologist, Dr. Carey, who said that Kehlani had injuries to her brain, her spinal cord, and eyes that would have required a severe level of force to cause those injuries. I mean, just imagine that. In fact, they said the perpetrator would have had to shake the little baby as hard as they possibly could. The full force of shaking, absolutely intentional at the highest degree. They said that Kehlani would have had difficulty breathing, that there would have been a noticeable change in condition immediately after being shaken. And they also noted, and this is going to devastate you, that the head trauma was unfortunately not the only injuries that that beautiful baby had received. She also had fractured ribs, and they would have been caused by the hard squeezing of her body from side to side with at least moderate force. She also had a broken leg, and that injury was apparently deep inside the bone. It had been caused by pulling and twisting the bones around the joint. Just imagine the kind of human being that can do that to a baby. Now, Dr. Carey also determined that the injuries had been caused as a result of one episode of violence. Now, it's horrific. The circumstances I've just described are absolutely catastrophic, devastating, murderous beyond a shadow of a doubt. However, I have to say I've got a tiny bit of solace, albeit very small, that Kehlani potentially did not endure repeated abuse in her short life. I imagine there was abuse there, but just not at the level that would have meant she was constantly in pain. It doesn't make it any better. It just makes me psychologically hope and have faith that maybe the horror that she endured was not consistent. Doesn't make the death any less upsetting. And in my eyes, it's no mitigation for Merthoca at all, but maybe it gives me some comfort of hope that the pain Kehlani experienced was short-lived. Hopefully she didn't suffer too badly prior to that horrific incident that I've described causing a death. Now, understandably, Nazli Merthoca was charged with murder. She was also charged with the alternative lesser charge of manslaughter. Herbert Clancy, he was charged with murder, causing or allowing the death of a child, and failing in his duty to protect his daughter. However, he was actually formally acquitted of murder on the directions of the judge. Now, in September 2025, Merthoca and Clancy's trial begins. The jurors essentially had to decide whether Merthoca or Clancy had shaken Kehlani, which had then led to those fatal injuries I described. Accidental injury at this point is out of the question in this case, so that wasn't even going to be considered. Now, Zoe Johnson, that was the person who worked for the prosecution, they said, one of them is lying. One of them did it, but only they know who the culprit is. She said that Nazli Merthoca and Herbert Clancy were selfish and irresponsible, and that they'd put their relationship above the needs of their children. Of course they did, because all they care about is their own self-interest. Children take that self-interest away and mean that you have responsibility and accountability for other human beings. So if you are selfish to the core, that's going to cause you an issue. And when it comes down to intimate relationships, of course, they put their own needs above one another's. That's why they're violent and abusive to each other. But like I said, it's always about their own self-interest. Now, that prosecutor said, despite the measures put in place by social services to keep the baby safe, they were, quote, doomed to fail as the couple's relationship was so damaged. It was said that their relationship had spiraled out of control and baby Kehlani was caught up in the middle of it. They went on to say that the ever-present risk to Kehlani turned into a fatal reality on July the 8th of 2024. They also said that when the emergency responders arrived at the scene that night, neither of them told them that she'd been shaken, which is really important for them to have said. So the prosecutor said that their attempts to protect themselves is, you may think, in stark contrast to their ability to protect Kehlani, which is 100% true. So well said. Basically, you're protecting your own needs over your child who actually has needs in that moment that led to a fatality. So if you cannot in that moment recognize what you've done and do your best to help your child, what does that speak about you as a human being? Now in court, Merthoca was not the kind of person to sit quietly. In fact, she shouted, "I'm a mourning mother. You are all heartless." I guess it's because they're all white supremacists who basically just want to throw you in prison because at the end of the day, you are an ethnic minority as opposed to a murderer or a killer or whatever you want to phrase them as. At this moment in time, you are the person in the dock because you have done something so devastating. Your child has lost their life. So let's just work that through. So just tell me what you're thinking again. You're heartless. Am I heartless? You're absolutely heartless. Why am I heartless? Because you're suggesting that what I did. Does that make me heartless or does that actually make me factually correct? No, it makes you a white supremacist. That's what it makes you. I'm not actually sure that that has anything to do with white supremacy. That's what white supremacists always say. White supremacists always say that people like me are heartless and that's why you're a white supremacist male who beats his wife. I'm actually a female for a start. No, you're not. If I say you're a white supremacist male who beats his wife, I am right. And the reason I know that is because you'd have to be heartless to disagree with me. I think I'm just being honest because you're a child killer. Anyway, these kind of people exist. Let that make sense. Genuinely, let it make sense. How do they live? How do people have these thoughts? What is going on in their brains that makes them come to these conclusions? But it's the way it is. We're all heartless, apparently. Now, after the couple's arrests, one of the things that the police had done is they'd seized their phones and they searched the messages. And these are shown to the jury so that they can kind of see the nature of the relationship. And they also want to highlight the approach and attitudes towards the children. Now, it's said that Merthoca and Kehlani were in a mutually abusive relationship. So they are horrible to each other. And at the end of the day, a female being violent towards a male, a female being coercive towards a male is as bad as a male being the same to the female. However, we can say that a man hitting a woman is going to do more damage than if a woman hits a man on the whole. Now, on June the 17th of 2024, Merthoca had actually locked Kehlani out of the flat. He texts her basically saying, "Who do you think you are?" She says, "I'm going to call the police." And Kehlani responds by calling her dumb and says, "If you go to the police, you lose everything." Moving like social on towards about domestic. So he's acknowledging that she's limited in her support options because they are pretending that they're okay, but really they're in a violent, toxic relationship and that's going to lead to the child or children being removed unless they actually are fit parents. So anything that she reports could be used against her, and rightly so. But it also puts her in a prison to some degree, not being able to get support should she want it. Now, she texts Kehlani saying, "Bye, you're dead to me. You hurt Kehlani eye." What the fuck? I'm reporting this. You gave her a black eye and blood. Her head is bruised as well. You won't be sleeping when the door's taken off. She didn't deserve this. And there's actually a Snapchat video that shows Kehlani lying on a cushion with an injured eye, which devastates me because obviously, even though the injuries at that point are not catastrophic, it does show that there were certain times where that child suffered. Like I said, I hope above hope that the final suffering she endured was completely atypical to what she'd endured before, but there's obviously been abuse and it's obviously involved injuries to that child prior to her death. Now, Merthoca had actually searched what to do if a baby had bloodshot eye and baby eye injury red spot. So clearly she's concerned and disturbed about the fact it's obvious because if you've got social services involved in your life and they see that your child has got an unusual injury, that's not going to look good for you. Now, Kehlani says, "It's an accident." and actually denies causing the injury, I think we can take that with a pinch of salt, can't we? These two are both liars. It's as simple as that. And that child is not safe in their care at any point. Now, they do go to the doctors 2 days later. And at that point, they say that Kehlani's been accidentally hit with a rattle by one of the older children. That, to a doctor, would make perfect sense because that happens regularly. But unfortunately, it's a missed opportunity, isn't it? And also, it shows that, again, they're not concerned about the child. They're concerned about what happens to them if their child is injured. Now, prosecutor Zoe Johnson said, in itself, the eye injury was minor, but it's a graphic example of the defendant's inability to care properly for Kehlani and their failure to take action to protect her from harm and remove her from danger. Amen to that, that's absolutely correct. It was also said that Merthoca had been under the influence of cannabis on the night Kehlani was attacked. So as I said, he doesn't report when she's taking drugs. That was never going to happen, was it? It doesn't make any sense that he should have been the arbiter of that situation. When it comes down to it, they should have been checking in regularly and doing drugs tests themselves. And it's said in court that she was a regular user. Also, it's worth noting that she'd refused to give a blood sample to police. And she actually asked one of the police officers how long cannabis was detectable in the blood. So you could have a blood sample. No, you can't. Please. No, I'm not giving you one. Why? Because I don't need it. I've got no drugs in my system. Right, well, then we can confirm it by a blood sample. I'm not giving you one. I don't like authority, white supremacist. Okay, right, well, I'm not going to force you. Yeah, just before you leave, though, could I just check with you? How long does cannabis stay in the blood system? Just randomly want to know in case I get asked in a pub quiz. You know what I mean? It's clear she has cannabis in her system. So in court, it's unable to be confirmed whether cannabis was there, but we obviously know it was. What they did find was 3 bags of cannabis, a partial joint, and a nitrous oxide canister in their flat. So I think we can all agree she was smoking weed. Now, when it came down to Merthoca's defence, Benjamin Einer said that all she wanted to do was be a good mother. I mean, you're really going in down a road where it's going to be very difficult to prove that, Benjamin. Sorry, you can say these things, you can suggest these platitudes, but to anyone with 3 brain cells, they're going to be like, she didn't want to be a really good mother. At the end of the day, a really good mother doesn't do what she does to a child and doesn't have an environment around that child that's so negative anyway, that's so toxic anyway. That same defence said the death of Kehlani had been an unbearable blow to her. Again, when it comes down to Kehlani, the only blows came from the parents in this case. So the idea that it's an unbearable blow to this mother, who I use that term very, very loosely with because she doesn't fit the definition of what we'd expect for a mother, it's ludicrous. And again, the jury are not going to be hearing that. They're hearing the evidence. They're seeing the pictures. They've seen the report from the autopsy. They know what's gone on with this child. They've got all of this in front of their eyes. The idea that you can say, oh, it's been an unbearable blow to this woman, to this mother. She wanted to be a good mother. Yeah, she might have wanted to be a good mother. Actually, that might be true. She wanted to be one. She just isn't one. She's a terrible mother. I mean, I suppose some people have aspirations for things they're never going to be able to achieve, and maybe this is one of them aspirations that she will never actually reach the bar of. Now, her defence described her difficult upbringing, said that she'd faced a number of significant challenges. He said that she'd been an angry person due to all the childhood and bad experiences that she'd been through. Sorry, that's not going to cut it with any of us. And I'll tell you why. If you can do some reflective exercises and reference your childhood and see how that childhood impacted you, if you can look back at the horror that you experienced, the trauma that you endured, and acknowledge how that's impacted you and made you feel rageful. And that's absolutely in keeping with how many people feel. Look, nobody should be abused. Nobody should be exploited. No one should be sex trafficked. No one should be violently affected in their childhood. Nobody should experience any of those things I've just said. And I understand that when you do, sometimes it provokes a level of anger. But the reality is that anger is actually a shadow emotion. It sits above the real emotion. So we feel anger for loads of different things. I'm angry because I'm humiliated. I'm angry because I feel grief. I'm angry because I feel sad. I'm angry because I feel that somebody has betrayed me. All of those things can have the response of anger, but it's the actual one that lies beneath it that's the thing that needs to be resolved. That's what we do therapeutically. Lots of people come in angry, and we help them to shift the anger and focus on the actual real feeling beneath it. If she knew that she was angry, if she recognized that she had a level of volatility, she should have put her children's needs above her own and allowed social services to take them and protect them. It's not enough to say, oh, she had a terrible childhood, therefore she became angry, and by the way, now she's killed a kid. I don't have empathy for that. There are lots of steps that can be taken before we arrive at a child fatality. Now, although Merthoca had not actually had an official diagnosis, reportedly she suffered with mental health. It wouldn't surprise me. Sounds like she had an awful childhood. I appreciate that. Again, mental health does not make you a child killer. After her arrest, she ends up having 2 reports made regarding her mental health. The first takes place on July the 29th, 2025. It was from Dr. Beji, a clinical psychologist. They said that Merthoca had a highly complex presentation, described her as a vulnerable lady with a complex history of mental health difficulties, including indications of childhood trauma leading to an eating disorder. Again, bulimia, anorexia, compulsive eating, all of these things do not lead to you killing children. Dr. Beji also said that she had developed a number of oppositional and defiant traits as a result of multiple negative experiences with healthcare services. As I said earlier on, that would make sense, but not to the point where it's a detriment to your own child. No matter how oppositional you are, when your child needs them, you should absolutely want them. That doctor also said, in my clinical experience, her reported behaviour at the time of her daughter's death are consistent with her history of potentially learnt behaviour traits, contributing towards a general mistrust of healthcare services. Ms. Merthoca reports an extensive history of mental health difficulties. I note that her records refer to a history of suicidal thoughts, overdose, domestic abuse, PTSD, anxiety and depression. I note that her records reference a history of sexual assaults. You know what? Bad things can happen to bad people sometimes. You know, it's very easy, isn't it, to frame this as oh, she has this awful history, therefore she has become this awful human being. No, awful human beings can have awful things happen to them, as well as good human beings having bad things happen to them. That's just a reality statistically. So maybe you can put all of these particular diagnoses in a box and say, yeah, this is the reality of a childhood, and we can feel absolute empathy and sympathy for that. But also, we have to have the other box, which is this is an antisocial personality. Where's that coming in? She's an antisocial personality. She is somebody who is high-level danger. She's somebody who's been very violent in the past, and now she's done the unthinkable, killed a child. Now, a second report was made by Dr. Ramesh Puri. That's a forensic psychiatrist. That was on the 2nd of August 2025. This actually contained information about her medical records, relationship history, and births of her children. And it was noted that Merthoca had said that she had last used cannabis on midnight the day before Kehlani was killed. We get to October the 14th, 2025. At this point, Kehlani is actually cleared of causing or allowing Kehlani's death. So at this point, Merthoca is actually convicted of manslaughter, and that is the lesser alternative charge. So she was not found guilty of murder. Now, let me tell you, the actual details of the trial, they haven't been made public, but the difference between the 2 charges is essentially the intent or the mental state of the killer. So essentially they're saying there's no premeditation in this case. But I'm just going to throw it out there, guys. I 100% struggle to see how shaking a baby to death, twisting the bones to break her leg and crushing her body, breaking her ribs, I don't understand how that's been considered unintentional. And that is a key aspect of manslaughter. Because for me, there's clearly malicious intent there. Now, I don't know the exact details, therefore I'm not fully informed of the evidence, so it is hard to comment aside from the comment that I have just made. Now, when it comes down to the sentencing, that happened on December the 15th, 2025, she was given a sentence of 9 years and 6 months. 9 years and 6 months. To me, that is just breathtakingly tiny. Bear in mind, only 2/3 of that sentence is going to be served in prison. Then she's going to be released on license. To me, that is an absolute joke of a sentence. I cannot understand it at all. You're telling me that a baby can be shaken to death, and for that, you can only serve 6 years in prison. What's the consequence? In what world is that an actual punishment? And it worries me because I think to myself, what does that mean in the future if it comes down to having children? Will she ever be allowed custody of her children again? She clearly can't be trusted around children. Is that written in? Now, in the sentencing remarks, Judge Mark Lucraft said, "It seems to me that the events here are consistent with the loss of temper by you." With respect to me, that reinforces the fact that she's volatile and dangerous. Doesn't explain the sentence that's so short. At the end of the day, it corroborates my perspective. This is not somebody that can be trusted around people. She's been violent to her partner. She's been violent in the past, assaulting another human being. She's killed a child now. Let's just throw her inside for 6 years and hope she gets better. She's not going to, is she? This woman has an unbelievably short temper. She reacts with violence often. Do you know what the real sentence should be? Behind bars, kept away from the public for the rest of her life. Give her her rights in prison, let her learn, let her educate, let her have a job, but keep her away from people she can harm. How on earth anyone can think that a few years in prison is enough when she's brutally killed a baby this way? In addition to having all of that history of violence, it is beyond me. The same judge, Mark Lucraft, said this: "The impact of the death of Kehlani will be felt by many. None more so, Judge, than Kehlani." Also, he said, although she's too young to know or understand what's happened, Kehlani's twin sister will grieve in years to come. And that's 100% right. We know that through studies. We know that when a twin is born and one is lost, what happens is down the line, they have this sense of survivor guilt. Often they feel that the dreams that they should have shared will never be shared. And that makes them feel that they're going through this period of loss constantly, that every achievement should have been a dual achievement. And that is an incredible cross to bear. The judge said, "Kehlani's twin sister will grieve in years to come, as will her older sister, her half-sister, and wider family members. Nazli Merthoca, you will have to live with the knowledge that you have killed your own daughter, and that fact is likely to have a lasting impact on your ability to parent your other children." I bloody hope so. I mean, when it comes down to it, I hope so. Are we being real here? It's going to likely have a lasting impact on your ability to parent your other children. Yeah, you're not a parent. You're a killer. You're not a mother. You're a murderer as far as I'm concerned, no matter what they found in court. How can it be that we're in a scenario right now where the judge is even bringing in her parenting style or parenting possibility into court? She shouldn't be allowed near kids. They said, not just because of the inevitable period of custody that will be imposed, but the concerns over your conduct and the safety of children in your care. There's no concerns. It's absolutely technicolor. The detail is there. We know what she's like with kids. She's unsafe. She's killed one. And it's an absolute heartbreaking point, isn't it? That not only will Merthoca's older children be aware their mother's a monster who murdered their defenseless baby sister, but Kehlani's twin is going to grow up, as I said, knowing that they should have had a twin sister by their side throughout their life. Like I said, they're probably going to experience survivor guilt, and they're also going to think to themselves, could have been me. Because it could have been. Look at the draw in that moment. She lost her temper with Kehlani, but it could have been the other twin as well. Now, the lead investigator on this case, Detective Inspector John Marriott, said Merthoca carried out a horrific assault on her own child. To add insult, she then spun a web of lies to the emergency services in order to cover up her responsibility. Though Kehlani's life was cut short by this hideous abuse, there were relatives who loved and cared for her. They have been left traumatized by her killing, and our thoughts are with them at this time. The lead investigator on this case, Detective Inspector John Marriott, said this: Merthoca carried out a horrific assault on her own child. To add insult, she then spun a web of lies to the emergency services in order to cover up her responsibility. Though Kehlani's life was cut short by this hideous abuse, there were relatives who loved and cared for her. They have been traumatized by her killing, and our thoughts are with them at this time. Investigators compiled extensive digital evidence, which, coupled with overwhelming medical evidence, painted a damning picture of the defendant at trial. Offences against children, especially of this gravity, are some of the most difficult cases police deal with. The evidence here was particularly harrowing and complex, and I would like to commend the investigation team for their work bringing Merthoca to justice. I do feel that that actual lead detective is probably very disappointed at the length that she's received in prison. As far as I'm concerned, Merthoca is really the worst type of person. She's someone who doesn't deserve to be able to have children, be near children, have anything to do with children. If you consider that Kehlani was only 3 months of age and she actually spent the first month of her life in hospital, Merthoca couldn't even keep a temper in check for 2 months. If I'd been on that jury, I would have been refusing to leave until a guilty verdict had been reached for murder, I promise you that. I have legitimately looked into whether it is possible to have someone retried because of this case. Apparently, any member of the public can request an unduly lenient sentence review. So that is how obsessed I've been about this. I think that the main problem is, of course, that she was found guilty of manslaughter, not murder. But for me personally, I genuinely believe this needs to be relooked at, because who wants someone like this walking free in 6 years' time? Who? Who in their right mind can justify that that is a sentence contextually appropriate for what this woman has done? Honestly, sometimes the justice system or the unjustice system in the UK takes my breath away. Kehlani deserves so much more, and she's been granted so much less. And I hope to God the twin sister never has to see this woman again in her life, because she is terrifying. And like I said, that's how obsessed I've been. I've been looking up how to get somebody retried because of an unduly lenient sentence. And I feel that this case certainly should be looked at again. As ever, guys, let me know your thoughts. Am I somebody who's being unjust here? Am I somebody who's being unfair on this child who grew up in a really unfair situation and became the woman because of that? Is she a victim of her trauma, or is she just a victim who should never have been victimised but would have always been a nasty, violent human being because it's just something to do with who she is, running through her core, running through every atom in her vein? Or do you think I'm right? Do you think this is an absolute miscarriage of justice and that Kehlani is the victim who even in death, even in her own death, has been denied the respect that she deserved? I'm the latter, without a doubt. Let me know your thoughts, as ever. Look after yourselves. Be safe.